My name is Eli Mercer, and for 4 seasons I worked as a park ranger at Cedar Hollow Recreation Area in the Arkansas Ozarks, about 40 minutes north of Jasper, if the county roads were dry and you knew which turns not to miss. Most missing campers get found. That's the first thing people should understand before they hear anything else. Most people who go missing in the woods are not swallowed by some mystery. They get turned around on a deer path. They leave camp without water. They drink too much and decide they know a shortcut back from the lake. They try to hike after dark with a phone flashlight and step off limestone. They panic. They circle. They get cold. Then somebody with a radio and a decent light finds them sitting under a cedar tree, embarrassed and shaking. And by morning, it's a story they tell the rest of their lives. That was true almost everywhere I worked. It just wasn't true at Cedar Hollow. The campers we lost there did not leave like people who meant to go anywhere. They left food on the table, keys in unlocked trucks, shoes beside tents. One man walked out without his glasses. A mother left a sleeping toddler in a zipped tent and got 30 yards into the woods before vanishing so completely the dogs never picked her up again. Every search report used the same language in one form or another. Last seen near the lower loops. Last heard after midnight. Believed to have become disoriented in storm conditions. I helped write some of those reports. I also helped search the part of the park that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And on a wet night in late July, Dale Hensley and I found out what happened to the missing campers. Not all of it, not enough to make sense of it, but enough that I left the Ozarks with a transfer request in one hand and Dale's blood on my rain jacket. Enough that I don't camp anymore. People who have never worked a park picture rangers wrong. They think badges and Smokey Bear. They think every day is trails and wildlife talks and pointing families toward scenic overlooks. Some of it is that, sure. On a clean spring morning, with the dogwoods blooming and the fog lifting off the hollows, you can talk yourself into believing it's almost a peaceful job. Most of it isn't. Most of it is toilets, burn bans, picking up beer bottles from boat ramps, telling somebody from Little Rock that no, they cannot run a generator all night in a primitive loop just because they paid for the site. It's checking fire rings for illegal ash pits, replacing split water spigots, logging license plates, clearing blown branches from service roads, running weather advisories to people who think a thunderhead over the ridge is just gonna pass. You do lost kid calls, snakebite calls, domestic disputes, drunk fishermen, broken ankles on slick stone, dogs off leash, teenagers carving initials into picnic tables. You learn where the soft shoulders are, which bathhouse door swells in humidity, and which regulars always lie when they tell you they're packing up tomorrow. Cedar Hollow sat in a fold of ridge and creek country, where the land looked gentle right up until it wasn't. Hardwood ridges, cedar breaks, red clay, bluffs the color of old bone, and limestone under everything like a second set of teeth. Water moved through that country in ways people from flatter places never respected. A hollow could stay dry for 2 months, then flood knee-deep in 30 minutes after a storm 3 miles away. Ground that looked firm could hide a sink. A game trail could split into 5 others and bring you right back where you started. Only now with dusk in the trees and no signal on your phone. The campground itself was built on 2 graded terraces above Miller's Cut, a narrow drainage that only looked harmless in summer. There were 18 numbered sites on the upper loop, 12 on the lower, 2 bathhouses, a ranger station no bigger than a single wide office trailer, and an old amphitheater the state had stopped using before I got there. Beyond that, there was a closed maintenance road, some chained service access, and woods thick enough to make 30 yards feel private. I took the job because I needed a steady check and insurance. Before Cedar Hollow, I'd been doing seasonal fire and trail work, some in Oklahoma, some farther west, never anywhere long enough to unpack properly. My mother was in Harrison by then, and her kidneys were going bad. The state ranger position paid less than the stories people told about it, but it was full-time, close enough to get to her in under an hour, and it came with benefits. That mattered more than scenery. By the time I got to Cedar Hollow, I was 34, divorced, tired of sleeping in bunkhouses, and old enough to value routine. I liked the structure of the job. Open gate at 6, patrol the loops, check the fee box, inspect trailheads, log maintenance, quiet hours at 10. Last round at midnight unless weather came in. For the first week, Cedar Hollow felt like any other park with a little more water under it. Then I met Dale. Dale Hensley had been there longer than anybody else on staff, long enough that nobody seemed fully sure when he'd started. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Built lean, with that tough, dried-out look men get when they've spent half their lives outdoors and the other half not complaining about it. He wore his hat low, kept his radio volume lower than everybody else, and moved through the campground like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. He wasn't unfriendly, he just never wasted words. The first real conversation I had with him happened 3 days into my first week. I was in the station at the end of shift, logging a broken hydrant cap and a disturbance complaint from Loop B, when he came in, set a folded sheet of paper on the desk, and told me to memorize it. I opened it expecting a maintenance list. It was a hand-drawn map of the campground, with a few areas circled in black pen, and 5 rules written underneath in block letters. The first one said, "After midnight, do not answer a voice outside the lights, unless you can see the speaker standing on gravel." The second said, "No camper relocations to unnumbered ground, ever." The third, "After heavy rain, do not follow barefoot tracks downhill alone." The fourth, "If dispatch hears your voice twice, leave the hollow and switch channels uphill." The fifth, "If you find a tent where no permit is posted, do not open it until daylight. Count the chairs first." I looked up at him and waited for the smile that was supposed to tell me it was a joke for the new guy. There wasn't one. "What is this?" I asked. "The version of training that matters here," he said. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was specific, in a way hazing usually isn't. He didn't react. He just reached over, tapped the top of the page with one weather-cracked finger and said, "You don't need to believe any of it yet. You just need to follow it." Why? Because if you work enough nights in this park, you'll stop asking me that. I almost pushed back harder, but there was something in his tone that made it feel childish. Not mystical, not dramatic, just settled. Like he was telling me to keep my hand clear of a belt sander. "Is this official?" I asked. "No." "Then where did it come from?" He took a second before answering. "From the people who stayed long enough to need it." Then he left me there with the paper. I took it home mostly because I planned on showing it to my mother and letting her enjoy the idea that Park Service people were apparently all half crazy. Instead, I left it on my kitchen counter, went to sleep, and came back to it in the morning with a little less confidence than I'd had the night before. Not because I believed the rules, because when I had driven the lower loop at the end of quiet hours, I'd seen what looked like a numbered signpost standing between 2 pines beyond the road, white reflector strip, dark number plate. For a second, I'd thought maintenance had stored one out there. When I went back with a flashlight, there was nothing there but wet brush. I told myself I'd caught a branch at the wrong angle. That lasted 6 more days. The first rule stopped being funny on Memorial Day weekend. That weekend is always bad in parks. Too many people, not enough shade, and half the visitors determined to treat public land like a rental property they can trash. Cedar Hollow was full by noon Saturday. Boats at the launch, kids on bikes, coolers sweating under tables, the smell of charcoal, bug spray and sunscreen everywhere. A storm moved in around 9 that night. Not a big front, just a local Ozark storm that built fast over the ridges and dropped hard. The kind with heat lightning at first, then a sudden cold gust and rain heavy enough to flatten campfire smoke. By 10:30, most people were in tents or RVs, listening to the weather hit nylon and aluminum. At 11:18, dispatch sent us a call from Site 8 on the upper loop. Possible missing child. I was in the truck closest, so I got there first. A man in a Cardinals rain jacket was standing in the gravel, barefoot, hair plastered to his head, shouting into the dark toward the tree line. His wife was behind him, holding a flashlight with both hands. She looked more stunned than panicked, which I've learned can be worse. The boy was 11. Parker Wiles, from Springfield, went to the bathhouse 5 minutes earlier. Never came back. That part by itself wasn't unusual. Kids get distracted. They hear frogs, see lightning bugs, find another family's dog. What made the hair lift on my arms was what the father said next. He was answering somebody, he told me. I heard him answer somebody in the trees. Who? I don't know. A woman, I think. Sounded like she was calling his name. His wife said very quietly. I heard my voice. I turned to her. What? She swallowed. I was in the tent with my little girl. Tom was outside. I heard somebody just past the fire ring call Parker in my voice. Exactly my voice. Rain hammered the leaves above us. The campground lights turned everything beyond the site into a wet black wall. Then I heard a whistle. Not random. 2 short notes, 1 long. The standard ranger field signal we used when we needed to mark position without chewing up the radio. It came from maybe 30 yards into the woods, downhill from Site 8. I had already started stepping toward it when Dale's truck swung up behind mine, headlights washing over the site. He got out before the engine fully stopped, heard the second whistle, and said, flat and sharp, "Nobody answer that." He said it to the family, to me, to the dark. His hand closed on my shoulder just long enough to stop my forward step. The father pointed into the trees. "That's my son." "No," Dale said. "It isn't." Most people would have argued. The storm helped us. Fear does that. It shortens debates. Dale told me to hit the truck siren and floodlights. I did. The sudden sound and white glare blew across the trees, and the whole loop woke up at once. Tent zippers, screen doors, people shouting to each other. Dale wanted noise. Human noise. Lots of it. Then, he told Parker's father to keep talking out loud, but not to say the boy's name again. That part I remembered because it felt so strange. So Tom Wiles stood in the rain saying things like, "Son, stay where you are, and you walk toward the trucks now," while his wife gripped that flashlight like it was the last stable thing in the world. 30 seconds later, Parker came out of the dark from the wrong direction, not downhill from the whistle. From upslope, where the trees were thinner. He stepped into the gravel with 1 shoe on, 1 bare foot black with mud, and looked past all of us toward the woods, like he was still listening to something. His mother got to him first. He wasn't hurt, just cold, shivering, and oddly distracted. "Where'd you go?" Tom asked. Parker blinked at him. "I was looking for the other bathroom." "There is no other bathroom," I said. He nodded once, like he understood that now. "I know." Dale crouched in front of him. "What did you see?" The kid took a while to answer. Not dramatic, just trying to line it up in his own head. "I thought there was another campground down there," he said finally, pointing downhill. "I saw lights, like lanterns, and I heard kids talking. Somebody said they had sparklers. In that rain, with quiet hours already on and lightning over the ridge, there should not have been any lights down there. Nothing but woods and the old service road farther back." "Did you see who called you?" Dale asked. Parker hesitated. "No, I just saw a yellow raincoat." His mother made a noise in her throat I didn't understand until later. We kept the family in the truck until the storm eased. Dale did a slow sweep of the tree line with me, never going more than a few steps off gravel. We found Parker's missing shoe turned upside down at the edge of a drainage cut. The inside was full of cold water. What we also found, once the rain backed off enough to work a light properly, were footprints. Bare feet, more than 1 set, adults and children by the look of them, all in the wet leaf litter just inside the trees, circling parallel to the site, as if a group had been walking around it in the dark. None of them deep enough to show weight clearly, none leading cleanly in or out. They just faded, I remember telling myself there had to be an explanation. Kids from another site messing around, tracks preserved oddly by the rain. Something simple that would sound obvious by daylight. At first light, Dale and I went back. The tracks were still there, though softer. So was one other thing neither of us had seen the night before. A white plastic permit tag half worked out of the mud at the base of a cedar root. The kind we zip-tied to coolers and tent handles when people checked in. It was old, brittle. The writing gone gray with age. The date on it was 7 years earlier. The site number written across the face was 27. Cedar Hollow did not have a site 27. I brought that up to Dale while he turned the tag in his hand. He didn't say much, just looked downhill for a few seconds too long, then slipped the tag into an evidence envelope and told me to write the incident clean. No editorial language. No mention of multiple footprints until we had photographs. No mention of the number on the tag until he talked to Crowell. Crowell was our superintendent, Anita Crowell. Good with budgets, press calls, and the particular kind of administrative calm that lets a person stand in front of a problem and act like naming it would be more dangerous than solving it. She read the report that afternoon, looked over the photographs and said Parker must have wandered, become briefly confused in the storm, and then come back by a different path. Then whose tracks are these? I asked. She pressed her lips together. Wet ground artifacting is not unusual after heavy rainfall. That was the phrase she used. Artifacting. When Dale showed her the old permit tag, her face changed for about half a second before she shut it back down. Dispose of it, she said. Dale didn't. I know that because 3 weeks later, he showed it to me again. Parker's family left early the next morning. Before they did, his mother asked if anyone else had ever reported seeing a yellow raincoat in the trees. Dale told her no. He lied because he didn't want them looking into old stories they couldn't do anything about. That night, for the first time, I took his rules home and read them like they were written for a real place. Rule 2 became real in June. The lower end of Cedar Hollow had a strip of ground beyond Site 12 that was technically still inside the old campground grade, but had been closed off since before I arrived. No fire rings, no tables, no gravel pads maintained, just a weathered chain between 2 posts and a sign that said, "Area closed for restoration." The sign was a lie, or at least it wasn't the whole truth. I found that out because of Mason and Leah Drummond, a couple from Cape Girardeau who came in on a Thursday afternoon with a truck bed full of gear and the easy confidence of people who camped often enough to think nothing could surprise them. They were in their 30s, friendly, good equipment, paid for 2 nights at Site 11. At around 9:40 that evening, Mason came to the station to ask if there was a quieter area available. The family in 10 had 3 little boys and no intention of getting them settled before midnight. I told him no. Full park. Quiet hours start at 10. Give it a little while. He shrugged, said fair enough, and went back. At 10:27, another call came in from Loop C, not from the Drummonds, from a retired couple across from them. They said they had seen a ranger come through and talk to Mason and Leah at their fire. I assumed they meant me until I got there and realized I hadn't been anywhere near that loop in the last half hour. The Drummonds' registered site was mostly packed up. Tent gone, lantern gone, chairs gone, their truck still there, but the bed had been opened and shut again recently. You notice small things when you work parks. Mud on the bumper where there hadn't been any. Fresh gravel displaced by the rear tire. The look of a campsite that hasn't been abandoned, just moved. The retired man across from them stood under his awning in slippers and told me a ranger had stopped by, maybe 15 minutes before. Older male, green uniform, brimmed hat, told the couple there was an empty spot on the lower ground where it would be quieter. What lower ground? I asked. He pointed past the end of the loop. Down there. I called Dale before I even walked that direction. He answered on the second click. Where are you? Loop C, by 11. Silence for a beat. Do not let them stay if they've moved. By then, I could already see lantern light through the trees beyond the closure chain. It was wrong in a way I can still feel better than explain. Too level, too neatly spaced, like lights hung at campsite height on a loop that wasn't there. Dale pulled up within 3 minutes. We went in together, boots on wet ground, lights sweeping low. About 50 yards past the chain, there was a clearing where no clearing should have been. Not a huge one, just enough open space for a gravel pad, a fire ring, and a picnic table half sunk into dark soil. The Drummonds' tent was pitched beside it. Their chairs sat around a low fire, their lantern hung from a branch. There were 4 chairs. I counted them because I had read Dale's rules enough by then to know I was supposed to. 2 enamel plates sat on the table. Steam still lifted off one of them in the flashlight beam. Mason and Leah's little blue healer was crouched under the bench, trembling so hard its collar tags ticked. The Drummonds were gone. No sign of a struggle. No overturned gear. No blood. Mason's glasses were on the table, next to a paperback swollen from damp. Leah's boots were beside the tent flap, unlaced, as if she had taken them off to go inside. The retired couple had been right about one thing. Someone had relocated them. But it hadn't been us. I moved toward the tent and Dale caught my sleeve. "Wait, I'm checking if they're inside. Look at the ground first." He shined his light down. There were no fresh prints around the tent. Not one. We had left a clear track walking into the clearing, but around the tent itself, the mud was smooth. Too smooth. As if the ground there had never taken weight at all. The dog made a low sound I had never heard from one before, more breath than growl, and crawled farther under the table when I came near the flap. "You think somebody took them?" I asked. Dale did not answer directly. Not till daylight. We could have somebody in there hurt. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the fear in him for the first time. Not panic, something older and worse. Recognition. "If they're in there," he said, "opening it right now won't help them." We backed out with the dog and kept the clearing in sight until Crowell, county deputies, and a search coordinator arrived. They treated it like a missing person case with suspicious circumstances, which it was, just not the kind they knew how to handle. At daylight, with half a dozen people standing around, Dale opened the tent. Inside were 2 sleeping bags laid out side by side, Mason's wallet, Leah's inhaler, a dry pair of socks folded neatly on top of a plastic bin, both of their phones, dead, and at the foot of each sleeping bag, positioned carefully heel to toe, their shoes. No people. No sign anyone had slept there more than a few minutes. The dog wouldn't come near the opening. K9 teams arrived by 9. Both dogs took scent from the couple's clothing, tracked downhill along the edge of the clearing, and stopped at a limestone break no wider than a tractor rut. One dog sat down and would not move. The other started whining, then pulled hard back toward the main loop. Sheriff's Department called it a likely disoriented departure, complicated by overnight rain. That explanation would have meant more if the trail camera at the closure chain hadn't shown Mason and Leah walking past at 10:14, carrying their lantern and chairs toward the lower dark, following a moving light source that stayed just ahead of them and never once showed a person holding it. You could see Mason turn twice like he was talking to somebody on his left. There was nobody there. Then the camera fuzzed white for 7 seconds. When the image came back, the chain was still swaying, and the woods beyond it were dark again. Crowell took that camera herself. By the next afternoon, she told us the footage had been corrupted by moisture. Dale waited until she left the office and then said, "That ground past 12 used to be part of the old campground grade." "Used to be," he nodded once. "Long time ago there were more sites lower down, before the state reworked the loops." "How many more?" "Enough that 27 used to mean something." That was the first time he admitted it outright. What happened to them? His eyes stayed on the desk. The answer changes, depending on who needs to sleep at night. The Drummonds' truck was towed after 72 hours. Their dog went to Leah's sister. Their case made the local paper for 3 days. then got swallowed by the next news cycle. A month later, when I was cleaning the lost and found shelf in the station, I found Mason's paperback with a damp line across page 98, like somebody had held it in cold water. There was mud inside the spine. By then, I had stopped pretending Cedar Hollow was normal. Rule 3 is the one I broke. That's probably why I'm still telling this story instead of forgetting it like Crowell wanted. July in the Ozarks is loud. Cicadas, boat trailers, kids, thunder building somewhere every afternoon whether you need it or not. The heat gets inside everything. Picnic tables sweat in the morning. Tent walls smell sour by noon. If a storm breaks that heat at all, people get grateful and careless. 3 weeks after the Drummonds vanished, we got one of those storms. Not a total washout, just enough rain after midnight to turn the campground roads slick and fill the drainage ditches. I was on early round the next morning, checking for washouts and making sure nobody had built a fire where they shouldn't, when I saw bare footprints leaving the lower bathhouse. Small adult feet, fresh, water still beaded in the impressions. They crossed the gravel, stepped onto the grass, and headed downhill toward the old amphitheater. I stopped at the edge of the road and remembered Dale's third rule. After heavy rain, do not follow barefoot tracks downhill alone. I should have called it in and waited. Instead, I looked at the size of the prints, imagined somebody injured or shocky after a bad night, and convinced myself the rule had probably been written for exactly the kind of overreaction I was refusing to have. That's how you do it when you want to ignore good sense. You frame it as professionalism, so I followed. The prints cut through wet grass to the amphitheater path, then past the chain across the old service lane. The amphitheater itself hadn't been used in years. Splintering benches, a concrete pad half green with slick algae, kudzu and vines swallowing the back fencing. I had been back there before during maintenance checks, never farther. This time the prints kept going, past the stage and into a belt of cedars behind it, where the ground dropped toward Miller's Cut, and the soil changed from clay to stony black muck. That was where I smelled the concrete. If you've ever gone into an old flood shelter or a pump house that hasn't had sunlight in it for a long time, you know the smell. Wet cement, mineral water, cold air with a metallic edge to it. It doesn't belong in open summer woods. The prints ended at a concrete stairwell sunk into the slope and half hidden by brush. I had never seen it before. There was a rusted handrail on one side and a steel door standing open at the bottom. Water ran in a narrow thread down the center of the steps. Not much, just enough to make the sound of movement in a place that should have been still. I radioed my location and got no answer. Then I remembered channel bleed during storms was common in the hollows, told myself that was all it was, and started down. The room at the bottom looked like an old utility bathhouse or storm shelter that had been repurposed and then forgotten. Concrete floor, drain trough, broken fluorescent housings overhead, a wall of chipped blue tile on the left. The beam from my flashlight found moss in the grout and something darker staining the lower corners. What it also found were tents, 3 of them, modern dome tents, standing upright in the middle of that concrete room as if people had chosen to camp indoors. 2 small, 1 large, all zipped shut, all filmed with cold moisture that shone when the light touched it. I stopped moving. Every sound got sharper at once. The tick of water into the drain, my own breathing. Somewhere deeper in the structure, a slow tapping, not loud, irregular, like fingernails on metal far away. Then a woman's voice said very softly, "Please don't leave us zipped up." It came from the biggest tent. My whole body tried to move before my head did. Every rescue instinct I had said somebody trapped, somebody hypothermic, get them out now. I stepped toward the tent, crouched, got my fingers on the zipper pull, and somebody shouted my name behind me hard enough to snap my breath. Dale hit the doorway at a run, grabbed the back of my vest, and pulled me away so fast I went down on one knee. The zipper had opened maybe 2 inches. A spill of black water came out over the threshold of the tent, and ran across the concrete like it had been waiting behind pressure. Not a normal amount. More than could have pooled in the floor of a tent. The voice inside changed. What had sounded like one woman a second earlier became several voices talking over one another in a wet, choked rush I could not make into words. I smelled old mildew, creek silt, and something stale under it that reminded me of turned earth. Dale hauled me backward toward the stairs. Out. There's somebody in there. No, he said. There isn't. Behind us. From deeper in the structure, that tapping started again, joined now by a dragging sound on concrete, the kind of sound you make when you don't want to put full weight on one leg. I got my feet under me, and we got back outside into the heat, where the sun looked wrong after all that cold. Dale didn't speak until we were 50 yards from the stairwell. Then he rounded on me and asked if I had any idea how stupid I'd just been. I told him if there were live people in those tents, I wasn't leaving them there because of a handwritten rule sheet. He stood there breathing hard, rainwater still clinging in the seams of his jacket, and said, Mitch said the same thing. That was the first time I heard the name. Mitch Turner had been a seasonal ranger under Dale 12 years earlier. Storm search, lower ground. Heard somebody calling from a tent in a structure that wasn't on the maps. Went in. Disappeared 20 feet from Dale's hand lamp. Search teams later found the same room empty, except for a child's lunchbox dated 8 years before. That story should have sounded impossible. It didn't. Not after what I had just heard. We brought county in that afternoon, plus volunteer fire for confined space assessment. By then the stairwell was still there, but the room beyond had changed. Same tile wall, same drain trough. No tents. No water except runoff. A back door in the concrete wall stood open to a short corridor that ended in blank stone. Aaron Lusk, a volunteer firefighter out of Marble Falls, went ahead with a helmet light while we were still discussing whether the floor was stable. He called back once that he saw another chamber. Then his light vanished around the stone bend. We were on him in seconds. The corridor ended at a solid limestone face. No chamber, no side passage, no Aaron. I don't care how that sounds. I know what I saw and what the rest of us saw. 1 second he was there. The next, there was nowhere for him to be. We pounded on the rock until our palms went numb. Crowell shut it down after 15 minutes on grounds of structural risk and the possibility of a hidden vertical drop. By dusk, she had the county bring in barriers. By morning, the stairwell had been backfilled with gravel and yellow tape. Aaron's disappearance got written as a probable fall into an unstable void obscured by runoff. His wife got told recovery was ongoing. I spent that night in my kitchen staring at Dale's rules and realizing they were too short, because nobody who wrote them had any room left for explanation. Rule 4 took longer to understand, because it depended on something I had never considered dangerous before. Radios are comfort when you work remote ground. Even when they annoy you, they mean someone else is out there. Somebody hears if you slip, get turned around, take a bad hit from weather. The chatter itself becomes a kind of structure in your head. Cedar Hollow taught me structure can be used against you. The 4th of July week brought a full campground again, plus a sheriff's substation trailer, because Crowell wanted the visibility after the Drummonds. She did not want panic, and she definitely did not want rumors that the park had become unsafe. So she increased patrols, closed the amphitheater access, and told staff any mention of phantom sights, old loops, or voices in the woods would be treated as misconduct. It was the kind of order you give when you already know what people have seen. By then, I had started keeping copies of everything. Reports, radio logs, photos. Not because I had a plan, because I knew things were being erased. On the 5th night of that week, a man named Noah Cooper disappeared from Site 4. He had come with his wife, their 6-year-old daughter Emma, and enough gear to stay 10 days. Quiet family, no trouble. At 1:12 in the morning, his wife called dispatch screaming that Noah had run into the trees after hearing Emma crying outside the tent. Emma was in the tent with her. Dale and I were nearest. The weather had turned again. Not full rain yet, but thick, low thunder and air so damp it felt like you could wring it from your sleeves. We got to Site 4 and found the wife barefoot in mud, one arm around her daughter, flashlight swinging all over the trunks. She kept saying the same thing. He heard her outside. He heard her outside. Noah's boots were by the fire ring, his glasses on the picnic table. Dale asked one question before anything else. Did anybody answer him from the woods? She nodded. Who? My little girl, she said, and pointed at the child in her arms. But she was asleep. The first radio issue hit while we were setting search sectors. I called dispatch with our position and request for county backup. They acknowledged. Then, maybe 4 seconds later, my own voice came back over the channel from somewhere downhill, repeating the same transmission, with 2 words changed. Not static, not garble, my voice. Unit 3, at Lower Loop Trail Split, Need County at Old Grade. Subject moving towards Site 27. I froze so hard I almost dropped the handset. Dispatch came back immediately, sharp now. Unit 3, confirm your location. We copied 2 transmissions. Dale was already looking at me. He had heard it too. That was when Rule 4 stopped being abstract. If dispatch hears your voice twice, leave the hollow and switch channels uphill. He took my radio, shut it off, and told me to move the Coopers to the upper bathhouse parking lot with the deputy trailer while he marked the lower access himself. I refused. Not out of bravery, out of anger. Noah Cooper was somewhere out there in a storm because this place kept using the same trick on people, and we were still acting like if we didn't say it plainly enough, it might go away. Dale let me argue for maybe 10 seconds, then said, "Fine, but we stay on gravel, and we do not chase voices." We took the lower service lane at first light with 2 deputies and a SAR team leader. GPS drifted the whole way. Twice my handheld showed us standing 20 feet into Miller's Cut, while my boots were on the road. We found Noah's trail because he had run fast and badly, clipping brush and sliding in the mud, not because the electronics helped. The trail ended where the closure chain used to be. In its place stood an old campground sign, half buried in black soil. Brown park board with white routed letters. Cedar Hollow Lower Loop. The paint was cracked with age. One edge splintered. Moss in the bolt holes. It did not look newly placed. It looked like something pulled out of the ground after years underneath it. One of the deputies asked if this was some kind of prank. Dale said nothing. We found Noah at 8:04 that morning, sitting in a folding chair in a clearing I had never seen before and would later fail to find again. He was alive, hypothermic, mud to the thighs, hands wrapped over his ears so tightly his knuckles were white. Around him were 6 empty chairs facing a fire ring full of wet ash. There were no tents, no other people, just Noah staring at a point about 3 feet off the ground like he was listening to someone speak from that exact height. He did not react when we approached. When Dale touched his shoulder, he flinched and said, "Don't let her keep talking." Back at the station, wrapped in blankets and pumped full of hot fluids by EMS, Noah finally managed a coherent stretch of speech. He said he had heard Emma crying outside the tent. Not in panic, just asking him to come see something. He had gone out without boots because he thought she'd wandered a few feet. Then he saw lantern light moving between the trees and what looked like the edge of another campsite downhill. He thought maybe another kid was there. He kept hearing Emma's voice just ahead of him. Then the trees opened. There were sights down there, he said. Real sights, numbers and tables. I thought I'd just gone farther in the dark than I meant to. I thought maybe this was old overflow camping. What happened then? I asked. He looked at me with eyes so bloodshot they were nearly pink. I started hearing other people, he said, like through tent walls, whispering, asking me not to unzip them, asking me not to leave them. His daughter, asleep in the next room with her mother under a deputy's borrowed blanket, began crying just then. Noah started screaming. We had to sedate him. Crowell called it acute stress response, complicated by exposure. That afternoon, Dale brought me a cardboard records box from the station basement. Older incident files. He shouldn't have had access to them, which meant he probably had made his own. I sat on the floor of the evidence room for 2 hours going through disappearances, false reports, partial recoveries, and maintenance memos that all clustered around the same part of the park. 1989, solo camper, missing after storm, Site 12 vicinity. 1997, unauthorized lights reported on closed lower grade. 2002, seasonal ranger Mitchell Turner, missing during weather evacuation. 2011, camper Marlene Voss recovered alive after 36 hours, found barefoot at upper gate, asking where the lower bathhouse had gone. 2018, child reported yellow coats by the trees, and under those, older copies. Carbon duplicates from before the station went digital. One geologist's assessment from 1978 recommending permanent closure of the lower terrace due to unstable karst voids and recurrent anomalous acoustic events during saturation periods. Not ghosts, not monsters. Just language a state office had used to say something was wrong without saying how wrong. The recommendation to close 3 loops had been denied. Tourism impact too severe. I remember setting the paper down and laughing once because it was either laugh or put my fist through the file cabinet. So that was the truth Kroll was protecting. Not